Well, hello. Welcome to our continuing devotional through the book of First Thessalonians. Currently, we're in First Thessalonians chapter 2, and in a moment, we're going to be picking it up in verse 3, where Paul's explaining their willingness to share the truth of God's word, despite the fact that that has brought them persecution, hostility, unfair treatment, physical attacks, verbal attacks, social rejection, and financial costs. There's been a whole lot of conflict. And they could have avoided that conflict by simply changing the message or sugarcoating the message or quieting down or whispering God's truth. But he says instead, we've been bold. We speak the truth verbally, boldly, clearly, uncompromisingly. But why are they willing to speak something that they know is going to be costly? Well, he explains that in verse 3. He says, "For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts." And Paul says, listen, the reason we're willing to speak so boldly and unwilling to compromise or keep the message quiet, even though we know it's going to cost us, is because this comes not from self-seeking, personal gain. That's not the reason we do this. Our appeal does not spring from error. We know what we believe and we believe the truth. It does not spring from impurity. That is, we're not trying to enrich ourselves. You all know that happens. We all know that people take Christianity and they use it as a means to enrich themselves and get people to send them money or get people to applaud them. But Paul says that's not for us. We're willing to speak a message that we know will be rejected by many and we know will be costly for us. And we're willing to do that because our motivation does not come from error. It does not come from impurity. We have no attempt, verse 3 says, to deceive. We don't have to change the message, or we're not trying to hurt people, deceive people, or twist God's word for personal gain. But rather, verse 4 says, we have been approved by God. We have been entrusted by God with the truth. And we take that very, very seriously. And because we understand we have to answer to God one day. This really impacts me as a pastor. I have to answer to God one day. Therefore, when I speak, verse 4, I can say the same thing Paul said. When we speak, we don't speak to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. See, God knows everything. It's possible, I could use deception. I could use flattery. I could twist God's word, and I could make it all appear, and they could use it in such a way as to personally benefit myself, and you could do the same. But here's the thing. You and I know that that God tests our hearts. He knows the truth, so we seek to please God. We're not worried about what people's responses may be. I know that some of the things I teach from God's word are not going to be well received. Some of them are going to be even misunderstood. Some are going to receive hostile responses. That's true for you also. As you stand for God's truth on sexual purity, as you stand for God's truth on the life of the preborn, as you stand for God's truth about other religions, as you stand for Jesus Christ and the gospel at the end as the only way of salvation, and you stand for God's truth about the coming judgment, you cannot expect that man's going to be pleased by that, but God will. God will be pleased, and God knows our hearts, and he knows that, when what we're saying, whether it's coming from a pure heart and a true heart, or whether it's coming from a heart that's simply trying to please man. Well, because they're trying to please God, he says in verse 5, we never came to you with words of flattery, as you know, nor were the pretext for greed. God is witness. He says, we didn't just try to butter you up and try to get you to like us. Nor did we use words that were a pretext and really just lies to try to get money from you. God knows this. God is witness. Verse 6, nor did we seek glory from people. We weren't seeking after people to applaud us or like us, whether from you or from others. Verse 6 says, though we could have made demands as apostle of Christ. He goes, we could have abused our position. We could have used it to enrich ourselves, but we didn't do that because we're out to please God, and we know that God tests our hearts. And it's not just true of the Apostle Paul. It's also for us. We need to seek to please God, not worry about what people think, what people say, and not seek glory from people, not seek the approval of people, but rather say at the end of the day, if God is pleased, I'm okay with that as I share God's truth. I hope you'll consider these things. Have a blessed day.